Andrew Carter was a Marine who served under contract and then returned to civilian life. At some point, the man realized that he had already proven himself and would always be able to come to his country's defense if need be. Therefore, having served his contract, Andrew did not feel guilty about returning to his hometown, located in northern Nebraska. He grew up in an orphanage and was deprived of parental warmth and affection from an early age. Maybe if Andrew had a family, his life would have turned out very differently. But he didn't, so having come of age, the young man left the orphanage and had to figure out life on his own. Thus, he decided to test his character in the Army. While serving in the Marine Corps, the young man acquired many skills, which unfortunately turned out to be completely useless in civilian life. Therefore, Andrew couldn't find a job. Unfortunately, a loader or janitor were the only vacancies available to him. At first, Andrew was feeling lost, unable to choose between the two. However, while he was trying to make a decision, the janitor's position was filled. Thus, the choice was made for him, which Andrew actually felt relieved about. Loader at the construction materials warehouse. Sounds good, at least I'll be able to stay in shape. And I'll get paid for my workouts instead of going to the gym, Andrew thought. As he went in for the interview, Andrew had no doubt in his mind that he was going to get the job. When a person really wants something, it seems that the entire universe helps them get it. Andrew immediately liked his future place of work. It was a huge building with 3 floors, the first 2 of which were the warehouse, and the 3rd floor had the staff offices and the HR department. "That's a huge building," Andrew exclaimed admiringly. A big selection of products and impressive sales of the company were mainly brought about by the fact that the construction materials were sold at a bargain price and there was an extensive system of discounts. Having climbed the stairs to the 3rd floor, Andrew found himself in a room filled with the voices of managers taking orders and the crackling sounds of faxes and printers. At first, the young man was a bit lost and didn't immediately realize where it was that he needed to go. Andrew moved from one office to another, involuntarily admiring the well-coordinated work of the company employees. The 3rd floor seemed like a minotaur labyrinth, in which Ariadne's thread wasn't invisible for some reason. Passing one of the offices, the young man noticed something strange. The reason for Andrew's surprise wasn't the fact that a pretty young woman of about 25 was working at the office. If the situation were different, the young man would have certainly taken the time to compliment the young woman, but not that day. The thing was that there was a picture in a black frame standing on the young woman's table. There was nothing unusual about it at first glance. However, Andrew knew that it wasn't so. The young man was astounded to see that the man in the picture looked exactly like him. The late man's hairstyle and clothes were different, of course, but his facial features and his figure looked exactly like Andrew's. The young woman sitting at the table looked up from the documents and noticed the loader standing nearby. Her cheeks immediately turned red and her eyes filled with tears. "What's going on here?" the young man thought, shivering, and was about to go into the young woman's office, but the woman from the HR department came out of the next room to greet him. "Are you the new loader?" the woman asked with a smile. Andrew was feeling lost about what he'd just seen, and therefore he didn't immediately answer her question. Only when the woman addressed him again did he answer her question with a nod of his head. Soon, Andrew was already sitting in the HR department and carefully studying the contract which he was supposed to sign. Meanwhile, the woman asked several unusual questions, which surprised the young man very much. "What about your marital status?" the HR woman asked suddenly. Andrew raised his eyebrow in surprise, then replied, "Well, I'm single, but what does it matter?" "It matters a lot, actually. A married man is usually more responsible and works harder because he needs to provide for his family," the woman explained immediately. Breathing a sigh of relief, Andrew realized that there was some logic to the HR woman's concern and the question she was asking him. According to the schedule, Andrew was supposed to start work in 2 days. "Why wait so long?" Andrew asked with some dissatisfaction in his tone. "Well, we need to work on your schedule to make sure there aren't any overlays and you can work without interruptions," the HR manager answered. Having put his signature on the contract, Andrew headed for the exit with a sense of accomplishment. However, there was only one thought spinning around in his head. Should he go into the office with his photograph or not? How did it even get up there? That's all so weird, Andrew thought to himself. Having gone back the same way he had came in, Andrew was happy to find himself outside and turn his face to the sun. Now that he finally got a job, there was one less problem in his life, which made him feel much better. Andrew only had time to take a couple of steps when he heard someone catch up with him. They lightly touched the man on his arm. Andrew turned around sharply and saw a woman of about 45 years old with a kind, open face and sweet gray eyes standing in front of him. "So you are my son," the stranger exclaimed and immediately wrapped the astonished man in her arms. Andrew blushed and pushed the woman away and even took a couple of steps back. "I think you mistook me for someone else. I'm not your son. You've made a mistake," the man said. And then a young woman ran out of the warehouse, the same woman who had Andrew's picture in her office. As it turned out, she was the daughter-in-law of the older woman who was now standing in front of Andrew. "What do you want from me? This is all some kind of mistake or ridiculous misunderstanding," the man tried to explain. But the woman had already taken him by the arms and pulled him towards the parking lot, where the woman's car was parked. A little later, the woman from the construction materials company introduced herself as April Green. Her mother-in-law's name was Dolores Johnson. Saying that Dolores' story shocked Andrew would be a huge understatement. The woman started from afar, talking about the time when she was young and dated a man named Robert Parker. The woman's mother was initially against their relationship, and therefore she tried to make them break up in every possible way. Like any woman wise with extensive life experience, Natalie Johnson understood that building a life with an orphan wouldn't be easy for her daughter. Since the relationship between the young people developed so rapidly, it quickly became clear that they would be getting married very soon. But a month before the joyful event, Dolores' fiancé died in a car accident. It all happened because the young man wanted to make himself look better in the eyes of his future mother-in-law. Thus, trying to earn some extra cash for the wedding, the man got a job in a taxi service, where he started working for days and nights on end. He was overworked and had chronic fatigue, which eventually caused the terrible car accident. The news of the groom's death plunged Dolores into a state of deep shock. The situation was further aggravated by the fact that the young woman was already pregnant by that time. Moreover, according to the ultrasound, Dolores was having twins. At that moment, her mother, Natalie Johnson, had realized that first of all, she needed to take care of her daughter, and only then think about her grandchildren. Therefore, she tried to surround Dolores with so much attention and care that the young woman hadn't felt in a very long time. Since Dolores was at risk for a miscarriage, she spent most of her time at the hospital. Unfortunately, despite the best efforts of the doctors, she went into premature labor, which prompted the doctors to perform a C-section. The babies were born healthy, but Dolores fell into a deep coma for a week. When the young woman finally woke up, Natalie informed her daughter that one of the babies didn't survive. At that moment, Dolores didn't even think that her mother could have taken one of her grandchildren to an orphanage. Natalie Johnson understood that Dolores wouldn't be able to handle raising two kiddos on her own. It would be simply too hard to do without a husband. It was through the fault of Natalie Johnson that the twin brothers found themselves separated at birth. Thus, one of Dolores' sons, David, grew up in an incomplete family, but with his mother, while Andrew grew up all alone in an orphanage. "What happened to my brother? That was him in the photograph, am I right?" Andrew asked impatiently. "David died a year ago. He worked for the police and got wounded in a shootout while detaining a particularly dangerous criminal. Unfortunately, the injury he sustained was fatal. David died before the ambulance arrived." April said with tears in her eyes. Despite having never seen his brother, Andrew was very sad to learn about his untimely demise. "So what am I supposed to do with all this information?" Andrew asked. Dolores Johnson smiled and, coming closer, said, "Come home, son. You'd be very welcome and loved." Andrew glanced at April and saw the sparkle of happiness in her eyes. At the end of this amazing story, it is worth saying that Andrew wasn't destined to work as a loader. With help from his mother, he went to study at the university and also got an internship at an office. Having finally gotten to feel what it was like to live with the real family, the young man couldn't help but feel incredibly happy every time he got to say the word, Mom. Andrew was on cloud 9 and surrounded his mother with endless love and attention. A year later, his friendship with April crossed the very line that turned into a very real romantic relationship. Meanwhile, the man never forgot about his brother and went to visit his grave every Sunday. "Ayo, little bro, I'm sorry for taking your place," Andrew said with tears in his eyes. Watching him from afar, the cemetery caretaker was sure that the strange visitor would keep the promise he had made to his dead brother. Meanwhile, Andrew could feel that David was watching him from heaven at that very moment and that he approved of the decisions he was making.